Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Monica Alba in Washington, and that was the closing bell on Wall Street. And we begin this hour with breaking news. The Trump administration announcing that an agreement between the U.S. and Iran has been signed by both parties. The news sending markets soaring, with the Dow closing just moments ago in record territory, up about 450 points today. And oil prices tumbling back down to around $80 a barrel, the lowest level since the first week of the war. The full text has not been released, but according to the president and senior administration officials, the agreement will reopen the Strait of Hormuz, halt the war, and kickstart negotiations over Iran's nuclear program, including potential sanctions relief. President Trump touting the agreement while in France for the annual gathering of G7 leaders, speaking alongside French President Macron during a bilateral meeting, saying text of the agreement will be released soon.
The deal's all signed, and the strait is already partially opened. As you know, they're doing a little hunting for a couple of mines that they've already found, but it's essentially ships are starting to go out. Now, on Friday, it'll be completely opened. But I think a lot of great things are going to happen in the Middle East right now. And very importantly, the oil is plummeting down, and the stock market is shooting up like a rocket today, like record kind of numbers. And the oil has taken its biggest plunge, and we're into the low numbers, not quite back yet, Kevin, to the extent, but we're getting close to the numbers we were before it all started. And the main thing is that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. They fully agreed to that with strong policing powers, and they won't have a nuclear weapon, which is what it was all about.
According to a senior administration official, in addition to the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, the agreement between the U.S. and Iran will also lift the U.S. naval blockade and start talks about Iran's nuclear program, which Vice President Vance is expected to lead. The administration also stressing Iran will only receive sanctions relief if it meets their commitments. Notably, state-affiliated media in Iran is reporting a very different agreement, including that negotiations won't begin unless oil sanctions are suspended, billions of dollars in frozen Iran funds are released to Tehran immediately, and that the conflict in Lebanon ends. Now, one of President Trump's staunchest allies, Senator Lindsey Graham, voicing his concerns, saying on social media, quote, "I am somewhat concerned that Iran's view of the agreement seems different than what the American negotiating team is claiming." He goes on to say, "I look forward to reviewing the final product, and I believe it is imperative that the architect of the deal, Vice President Vance, and his negotiating partners be part of the process in presenting the final deal to Congress." The vice president responding in an interview this morning.
And I'd caution Lindsey Graham and anybody else not to believe the hardliner propaganda in Iran, but to believe what's actually in the agreement. But we'll be releasing the text this week, and what everybody will see is that Iran doesn't get a dime of money unless they perform their obligations. And the money that we're talking about is fundamentally sanctions relief. We're not giving them American money. Not a single dollar of American money will go to Iran. Well, we already signed the deal digitally yesterday, and there's been no money released, and that won't change, George. Again, this is a performance-based thing.
Joining me now is our team of reporters covering all the angles around the world. Senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez is in Geneva covering the president's trip. Senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube is here with me on set. Chief international correspondent Keir Simmons is in Doha. International correspondent Matt Bradley is in Tel Aviv. And also with me is business and data correspondent Brian Cheung. All-star panel here to kick us off on a big day and to break this all down. Gabe, I do want to start with you because we just laid out some of the broad strokes of this agreement. But what happens next in terms of where these negotiations go from here?
Well, certainly, Monica, there are a lot of broad strokes, as you just laid out. And the problem is we don't have the text. The president's saying today, over the next 24 to 48 hours, that it would be released. And senior U.S. officials have been saying that. But the truth is we don't know exactly what is in this agreement other than what top administration officials have hinted at. Now, what we do expect is this formal ceremony on Friday. The president saying today that it would likely be the vice president that would attend it here in Switzerland. And the president saying that the Strait of Hormuz would reopen then, that traffic would get back to normal in the next 30 days or so. Now, what we heard from senior U.S. officials today, there will not be a change in military force posture as a result of this memorandum of understanding, so no change in the military there. But there are a lot of questions about what happens in the actual Strait of Hormuz. The vice president saying in interviews earlier today that it will be a toll-free system. Iran's foreign ministry, though, saying today that it plans to charge some sort of maritime service fee, so it's unclear exactly that will mean. And then administration officials, including the vice president, laying out this possibility of any sort of sanctions relief in this next phase of the talks if Iran does agree or does essentially tied to its performance, to Iran's performance. And that's something that will have to be ironed out over the next 60 days or so. There are huge questions about whether this will hold in Lebanon as well, this ceasefire in Lebanon. And so until we get more of these details, a lot of people around the world are watching to see how this all plays out, Monica.
Yeah, Gabe, let's talk a little bit more about that issue, the idea of these funds, because the administration has been walking this fine line when it comes to that sanctions relief or potentially unfreezing those funds for Iran. Because back in April, when those negotiations were taking place, then President Trump posted explicitly, no money will exchange hands in any way, shape, or form. But that doesn't really seem to be the case now, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Look, the Trump administration is very careful not to highlight this potential for sanctions relief. But earlier today, the president was asked about that. Let's listen to what he had to say and also what the vice president had to say specifically about that a little earlier today.
Mr. President, does the deal involve any sanctions relief for Iran? When would that go into effect?
No, it doesn't. Well, they have to. It's really a behavioral thing. If they do what they're supposed to do, that starts taking effect.
If we see the Iranians making, for example, taking action to eliminate their stockpile of enriched material, then yes, sanctions relief will follow.
And clearly, Monica, that is something that we didn't really hear from President Trump beforehand. Any sort of what the administration would have previously referred to as paying off the Iranians. They're trying to reframe this, trying to argue that this isn't paying off the Iranians, just simply incentivizing them to do the right thing. But certainly a lot of questions remain over the next 60 days, including that question of nuclear enrichment and the specifics tied to that, which, again, we're still waiting on details of that once this text of this memorandum of understanding is released, Monica.
And Gabe, the president, of course, has been very critical of the Obama administration for sanctions relief on Iran and unfreezing those funds. So what is different? What are they saying is different about this agreement?
Well, look, the White House and senior U.S. officials have been repeating that the difference between this and the JCPOA signed under the Obama administration is that this White House was negotiating from a position of strength, whereas the Obama administration was negotiating from a position of weakness. Certainly, that is one argument, but the devil really will be in the details. You heard from President Obama in an interview with ABC over the weekend, suggesting that he thought that the Trump administration wouldn't be able to reach an agreement that was any significantly better than what he had reached during his administration. But the Trump White House is downplaying that. They're saying that they have a better relationship now with the top leadership in Iran, something that they didn't have for decades. And they think that Iran, they will not have a nuclear weapon, even though Iran had for decades said that it wouldn't pursue a nuclear weapon, right, and said so under the previous agreement struck during the Obama administration. So certainly we're still waiting for the text of that document.
Yeah, that'll be really important, Gabe. Thank you for all of that context. I do want to turn to Courtney on set with me here. Court, you've done a ton of reporting specifically on this issue of the mines. The president says that the Strait of Hormuz can be open for business on Friday as long as that work continues to remove them, according to him. But what does your reporting actually say about that and how soon we could actually see the strait safely being crossed by vessels?
So the U.S. has had a number of different intelligence streams and tips and things that there are places where Iran laid mines before the war, was laying early on, and then even throughout the course of the ceasefire may have been placing additional mines. The U.S. military has spent quite a bit of time and effort to try to find those mines. And at this point, according to the officials we spoke with, they have not pulled any mines out of the water. Now, there have been cases where they have seen things that are circular and could possibly be mines, but they've never actually identified any as such. And we should point out, there have been ships that have been transiting through. It's a much smaller number than it was pre-war, but there have been some ships. So we know that there are at least some corridors that remain open for ships to be able to safely transit. But at this point, the number of ships that are going through still remains very, very low. If, in fact, there may be an effort to literally sweep through the entire area and see if they can find anything visually. They have underwater robots. But again, at this point, they've not positively identified any mines.
Would the U.S. military say right now that it feels it does have operational control over the Strait of Hormuz?
They do, and they say that all the time. CENTCOM says that they are controlling what's going in and out, that they're allowing some humanitarian ships in, that there's this coordination effort where they've allowed a small number. It's usually a single-digit number every single day over the last 5 or 6 weeks now. But yes, they would maintain that they have operational control, even though there really are still these two competing blockades between the U.S. and Iran.
Given this current agreement that is in place, this tentative framework, how soon could troops come home?
I mean, I don't see it as likely that the Trump administration would pull back troops out of the region. I think that if, in fact, the blockade is to be lifted on Friday, I think we could see some of those ships move back a little bit, potentially a little bit further back from the Strait of Hormuz than when they're operating in sort of the northern part of the Gulf of Oman right now. But I don't see the U.S. a major withdrawal of troops unless there is some sort of a follow-on final agreement that includes that.
And Court, just to some breaking news that we're just learning about right now, a crash at Edwards Air Base in California. What else do we know about
We
that?
don't know a whole lot other than we've got a statement out of Edwards saying that there was a B-52 that crashed soon after takeoff. It was a little after 11 o'clock this morning, local time there in California. It's rare. It's very rare to hear about the crash of one of these bombers. So we're still trying to gather some information. We don't have any information, unfortunately, about the crew or anyone who may have been on board the aircraft when it went down.
We'll stay on top of that. Courtney Kube, as always, thank you so much. And Keir, I do want to turn to you now there in the region. How is this deal being viewed right now by Tehran, and what kind of pressure are the Iranian negotiators facing on their side to end this conflict?
Well, I would say three things in Iran, and we managed to get through to Iran today. Disbelief amongst many there that this is really the end of the war. Skepticism amongst others that the Trump administration really is committed to a ceasefire and to an end to the war. And opposition from others who do not believe that Iran should do a deal with the US because they believe that they were winning this war. Now, we did get through to a senior academic at the University of Tehran this morning, and it was interesting to hear him talk, kind of answer that question that you asked them, Monica, and that what he says is that, they say this often in Iran, that the history of disappointment or they would even say betrayal by US governments in the past when they thought they had deals, notably the nuclear deal, is coloring the way even the top of the leadership in Iran is viewing this. Take a listen.
It is not something that is somehow exciting in Tehran, because we do have the experience of having a kind of international deal between Iran and United States, which was JCPOA, and Donald Trump himself withdrew from that international deal. It's the first step for a kind of long marathon between Iran and United States.
An interesting echo there, Monica, between what he has to say, what many in the Iranian regime are saying, and what J.D. Vance said today, that this is going to be a step-by-step process to build trust. Both sides are viewing it that way because there is no trust, frankly.
Yeah, zero trust. We've heard that from both sides. Now, the president did say earlier today that the oil is flowing through the Strait of Hormuz, but Iranian state media says that it remains in control. So where do things stand right now? And is Iran prepared to have the Strait of Hormuz go back to the international waterway it was before this entire war started?
Well, it depends who you ask in Iran and in the Iranian regime. And I think part of that is because, let's be honest, the Strait of Hormuz, they've demonstrated that they can threaten the Strait of Hormuz, which if you took a long boat ride from here, you would reach it. And it's the only way to get from Qatar here, for example, and to ship goods, and particularly oil, for example. So the Iran can threaten the Strait of Hormuz no matter what the outcome and final resolution of all of this is. And I think another point, too, the people that you were talking to before are great reporters. The administration now, senior administration officials are beginning to say that, yes, this will be financially beneficial for Iran. So if you think about it from Tehran's perspective, either they're going to charge tolls or fees or whatever you call it around the Strait of Hormuz, or they're hoping they'll get sanctions relief or even money that they think they're owed that has been held away from them over the course of these negotiations. It's one or the other.
Yeah, that's a key storyline for sure that we'll be watching. I do want to also just ask you, Keir, the president today said pretty plainly that Iran has, quote, fully agreed to give up their nuclear weapons. But have you seen any Iranian official make that kind of commitment as part of this initial memorandum of understanding?
Not publicly. And actually, just before you came to me, I just went through the X accounts of the Speaker, Galabaf, the Foreign Minister, Araghchi, the President, Pezeshkian, see if they've said anything in the past hours in relation to the nuclear. And no, they're not saying they're going to do that. Now, I guess you could argue they wouldn't say that publicly because that is to be discussed, to be negotiated, and there will be talks even here in Doha in the coming days, even before the signing in Switzerland. So the answer is no, but I guess maybe watch this space.
Keir from the region, thank you so much for that and for bringing us that interview. I want to turn now to Matt in Tel Aviv. Matt, the president has said that Israel will eventually get on board with this deal. Even though Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel isn't a signatory to the latest agreement. What more do we know about Israel's involvement?
Well, it sounds as though it's minimal. And the fact is that Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, has basically been apologizing for that tonight. Not in so many words. He made the argument, the only argument he could make, which was that this deal will still benefit Israel. It's coming amidst a storm of criticism from Netanyahu's allies, from his opponents, from his rivals, even from top figures in the military who aren't necessarily criticizing the deal directly, but have vowed that they will remain in Lebanon, as well as in Gaza and the West Bank and Syria, and will defend Israel's borders despite what looks like, to Israeli media and to so many in the political class here and to so many Israelis, we've already seen the polling numbers diving over the past couple of weeks, it looks like a strategic failure and the punishment that the prime minister has to reap from basically overextending his hand.
And the president did blame Israel's strikes on Beirut for delaying the signing of the deal over the weekend. In an interview with Axios, he used many four-letter words to talk about Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's actions. Is there any indication that Israel is going to be pulling back in its operations, specifically in Lebanon, Matt?
Well, they won't be pulling back from their positions just over the Israeli border with Lebanon, inside Lebanese territory. We don't know what they're going to be doing further afield. The Israelis have deployed quite a number of troops into Lebanon, but consistently from the beginning and really from all the way back in March, several weeks after this offensive started on February 28th, we've seen the Iranians trying to bundle together the Lebanon file with the broader treaty and ceasefire deals and negotiations that have been going on between the U.S. and Israel on one side and Iran on the other. Now, it looks as though they've done so very successfully. And this is why here in Israel, this is widely seen as an American deal with Iran that is being imposed on Israel against their will and against the objectives of Israel's senior military leadership. There are so many people in this country, in prominent places, in security positions, who are demanding that the Israelis go ahead and finish Hezbollah once and for all. And they blame Netanyahu for not standing up to President Trump and saying, we will not be shackled in this fight against Hezbollah. Instead, this really does look like a climb down, and one in which the Israelis participated in, attacking Iran, but they didn't get a chance to sit down at the negotiating table and craft that final deal that they're now saying basically is going to be imposed on them. That's what the media is saying.
Matt Bradley, thank you so much for your reporting. And Brian, I want to bring you into the conversation now because this agreement has sent oil and gas prices tumbling. So explain what we're seeing here today.
Yeah, well, oil markets are reacting sharply to this. Prices on an average barrel of oil that are trading on the commodities market, trading at around $80 as of settlement today. And again, when you consider that we were somewhere closer to $110 just a month ago, that is a precipitous fall and does explain why we've already seen prices at the pump start to fall, even in the lead up to this announcement. Now, I should point out that gas prices are now $4.07. There's good reason to think as a result of the action in oil markets today that could fall below $4 a gallon as soon as tomorrow. But again, the big story here is whether or not this ceasefire will hold. We don't technically have anything signed until Friday, and everyone will kind of recall what happened in April when there was an announcement from Iran that the Strait of Hormuz was reopened. What happened after that? It was only one day before they then reclosed it, and the U.S. blockade was put into effect. So again, the fragility of this is something that the markets are thinking about, but at least the initial reaction is positivity with those oil markets trading down.
You touched on this, but I think the big question on a lot of people's minds is how quickly those gas prices could come down. Do we have any sense of when they could come down to pre-war levels?
Yeah, and again, we could see sub $4 a gallon averages as soon as tomorrow, but a lot of people will be quick to say, hey, Brian, wait, pre-war levels were somewhere closer to $2.98. So I think that the thinking here is that if prices do fall from here, it's going to be more like a feather as opposed to like the dropping like a rock comparison that the president has used. Analysts who watch oil markets very closely are saying, look, you have to remember that ships are going to have to get ready to travel back through the Strait of Hormuz. There are a lot of insurance questions. They have to get loaded up. The infrastructure in that region has been heavily damaged since the beginning of this war. And for that reason, you have Kepler. This is a group that watches oil markets very closely, saying 500 vessels were in the strait at the time of writing, and it could take 2 to 3 months to return to pre-war movement, let alone pre-war supply. So for that reason, it could be a while to get back to pre-war levels if we do ever get back there anytime soon.
Yeah, months from now, potentially close to the midterms as well. Let's talk a little bit more about oil specifically, because we did note that it has dropped now to around $80 a barrel from the $110 before this agreement was announced. But how much of that decline is caused by more oil that is flowing globally, or is this just based off of optimism around the strait starting to reopen?
Yeah, that's a great question, Monica. It really is kind of a question about how markets operate. It's based off of future cash flows. And when you think about the fact that, yes, despite this announcement, there are certainly not 500 ships that are trafficking through the Strait today. And in fact, we don't even know if there will be 500 ships trafficking through the Strait on Friday if this ceasefire is followed through on. It would take a long time to get there. But what oil markets are pricing in is a light at the end of this tunnel. But again, they priced back at $80 a barrel in April when there was the announcement from Iran that they had reopened the Strait of Hormuz. It did dip down to about $80 a barrel. But then guess what? It shot right back up to above 100 after that was reversed. Could the same thing happen here? If there's a U-turn on this, again, remains to be seen. We'll have to watch.
Won't be an on and off switch. Brian Cheung, thank you so much for that.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.